Welcome, Terri Allison and Janet Lucy, to the Wild Wonder podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so happy you're here. I don't actually remember how I came across your book. I do remember the season I was in because I was frantically looking for something to help me connect with my daughter that's coming of age. And I came across your book and I was like, this is perfect. It has rituals, it has stories and myths. But what prompted you two to write this book together?
All right. Shall I go, Terri? Yeah. Okay. Well, Terri and I have a very long time, deep, special friendship. And we also each have two daughters. And so this is a journey through time because we started writing the book about 5 years before it was actually published.
Oh, wow.
And it was published in 2002. So we had started really intuiting this idea about 5 years prior. And at that time, we were both dabbling in writing. We didn't come to this project as, really experienced writers. We were dabbling and had found, the power of intuition and using our voices through writing. And so we would meet at the beach to spend time together writing, which was lovely.
Nice.
And at the same time, we had both been reading a book by Mary Pfeiffer, which you might be familiar with. It's called Reviving Ophelia.
Mm-hmm.
And the subtitle is Saving the Selves of Adolescent Girls. And it's struck such a deep chord in each of us because it's really about the ways that girls around the preteen years start to lose themselves and lose their voices in ways that, can be really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were sort of in that alert mode. And at the same time, our four daughters were approaching the coming of age years. And Terri's daughter Michaela's the oldest, and she was 11. And then Emma was 9, and my daughters Austin and Sarah were 8 and 5. So they were all relatively young, but lining up. They were in the queue. And Michaela was showing, the early stages of puberty. So we, definitely were aware that it was time to start, opening up to how we were going to do this, how we were going to guide them through the coming of age years. So we started looking for resources and, into the bookstores and so on. And, we didn't find what we were looking for. There were a lot of books about raising girls and menstruation and puberty. And what we were really seeking was something more expansive with a spiritual focus. And so, as we mused about it all, we were just, we received this divine inspiration. And I can still remember exactly where we were and under this, big umbrella at a table at the beachside restaurant. And we just had this idea, what if we wrote a book? And we both came from backgrounds in psychology and child development. So we felt like we had, the credibility and some expertise to approach the subject. And it required a lot of research because we weren't entirely clear where we were going with it. But through the research, what we really unearthed it was like an excavation of the ancient moon goddess cultures, worldwide moon goddess cultures. And in that, we recognized that there was ancient wisdom that we would like to bring forward to share with not only our daughters, but other mothers and daughters.
Right.
And so we really saw the moon as this metaphor of the divine feminine, which we wanted to illuminate, and as a guide. And so that really informed how we then laid out the chapters. And as you've seen in the table of contents and in your own reading, each chapter has a moon theme. and we were wanting to illuminate, all the really valuable qualities of the divine feminine, like intuition and using your voice, creativity,
Right.
dreams, and also get into, um, you know, um, menstruation and sexuality and so on. So that's how it all started. That might be a longer version of, of how we got there.
No, that's perfect. I'm actually curious because when I was reading it, I thought back to my own coming of age years, right? And my own losing of my voice
Mhm.
and how it took so many years to come back to that. Like
Mhm.
I always say when I meditate, like my 12 years old was my perfect year. Like I knew who I was, I knew what I wanted, and then
Mhm.
it was like a dissolving of self until
Right.
probably 30, where I was like, what? None of this. I don't want any of this.
Yeah.
I don't know who chose all these things, but it wasn't me
Right.
and I don't want it. Did
Right.
you also write from a place where you were also speaking to a younger version of yourselves?
Oh, that's a good question. Terry, do you have a sense of that?
That's a great question. Maybe in retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time, well, for me at the time, I have a son as well.
Mm.
So we had a bunch of little kids. I think that as we started to have it unfold, maybe so, because there was a point where we were thinking of tying the book to our own coming of age
Mm.
as we moved from, maiden, mother, crone, into that. And it got very complicated. But we were noticing our own developmental journey
Right.
through it. And so I've never been asked that question before, but yes, I think in retrospect, we were looking at our own development, and it gave us a lot of freedom to think back. I was raised in a very Catholic family.
Mm.
So I had a confirmation,
Mm.
but that was nothing, and that was the marker.
Right.
That was the marker, but it was nothing like I wanted to have for my girls.
Right.
Yeah, and
In
so we
general.
did look for any of those, kind of coming of age milestones.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a lot of our coming of age experiences, were sort of marked by, um, not really anything of significance, maybe at the first period or a first
Mm-hmm.
sexual experience. That's how coming of age, was sort of historically defined. And we
Right.
recognized it was so much broader. And, as Terry's noting, we were also acknowledging, we were coming of age all over again. We were in our
Mm-hmm.
40s. And that's just such a whole other stage that we were coming into and finding our, new voices and
Mm-hmm.
our intuition and our, our own kind of sense of power. So, yeah, what we really acknowledge is that coming of age is sort of continuous.
Yeah.
We're always coming of age.
Right. But
Into
going to that, when I
yeah.
was reading it, I was also, when I was looking for the book, actually, I was thinking about whether there was a significance between like girls coming of age and then women or their mothers at the same time going into this different season, right? Whether
Yes.
that's looking
Yes.
towards perimenopause or in menopause, where we seem to be going into two different experiences. And I wonder if there's some connection between them.
I would say
Yeah,
absolutely yes.
yeah,
I mean, coming
yeah.
into motherhood itself is one of the most profound passages, I think, in a woman's life. And our
But
children,
yet,
as you noted, were
yeah. Oh,
young. So we were sort of, recently in that stage. Go ahead, Terry.
I'm sorry, I was, but I think that we were looking at, our girls were a little bit older, so we weren't doing the infant toddler
Mm-hmm.
piece anymore. And then really looking at, okay, what's next?
Mhm.
What's next for us?
Mm-hmm.
So it was this, and one of the things that we talked about and I got so excited I kept interrupting you, Janet, is that we were talking about the struggle that there's a point where, if the mother and the daughter are experiencing some of the same sort of coming of age ideas, emotions, and things like that, that it can be fraught with conflict because we're both trying to figure out who we are. I remember just deciding, like, wow, who am I now? And so it was a really nice way to kind of do it together. Because every time I run a group, I learn a lot more from the girls than so.
Yeah, at first it felt oppositional for me. Like I'm going and like leaving that whole like maidenhood era, right? As my daughter's like stepping into it. It felt contradictory almost. But the way you describe it as like we're both moving into a new phase, then we could find some common ground there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly, my work for years has centered around facilitating women's writing circles that have been, really a very, like a source of spiritual self-discovery. And Terri facilitated and led what we came to call moon groups, moon circles. So she was working primarily with the girls. And I was doing work with women, and we were seeing those parallels. These processes of self-discovery were happening in both sets of circles. So, yeah, there was connection. It was pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Did you feel like there was a lot of like writing on this? Because there's this, at least I had this fear, like looking out at mother-daughter relationships, like if I don't get this right, then a relationship is over. Because we go, like not to be dramatic, but like you go from the age of where your kid thinks you're like a goddess, right? You can do no wrong. And then you go into this age where your kid thinks everything you do is terrible.
I remember a point when Terri came up with a word that felt so right and true, and the word is elastic. Acknowledging that the mother-daughter relationship is elastic, and we come together and we fall apart and we come back together. And so that to me was so reassuring, because those kind of expansions, contractions are so inevitable.
Yeah.
And so to remember, oh yeah, we're going to keep going through this, and we still are,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to add one thing. So what we also noticed is that there was an age, or when the girls, I'll call them girls, were more sort of fertile and receptive to our ideas. We were introducing the concept of rituals and myths and things they weren't getting in school, or from the mainstream media. And Terri has a lot of experience working with the girls in her circles that was just so validating to what we were seeking to explore with them. Yeah.
Did you ever find resistance? Because I feel like sometimes when I try to do these things, especially with like 11, 12-year-old girls, I teach yoga in the schools. So not so much with the kids that have signed up for my class, because obviously they want to be there. But like with the neighborhood children, I kind of have to, I don't want to say trick them into it, but it's kind of like when you put spinach in the smoothie to get them to eat spinach. I have to like plan it like a party. Like I can absolutely not say ritual. I can't say like we're doing this because blah, blah, blah. It kind of has to be like, oh, we're going to get together and have fun. Like last week we painted rocks, but I didn't say it was for spring equinox, and I didn't mention any of the goddesses. Did you ever feel, and maybe this is more for you, Terri, that there's some resistance from the children or the girls in doing this work?
Yes. And I can remember, and so that that's kind of why we did or not kind of, but that's where the art and the art activities and the activities in each book came. So I've done some mother-daughter groups,
Mm.
which were fun. And so, but it was a group of mothers and a group of daughters, and they all had their own friendships.
Mm.
So that was, they would clump together. The mothers would, when we were doing the art projects, the mothers would talk, the girls would talk,
Oh, okay.
and things like that. And, but we always came together at the end. And then when the girls were just with me, I wasn't their mother.
Mm.
And so we were able to introduce some of the concepts. And then once everybody kind of got used to the language, they seemed to settle in. And, and I always had a friendly crowd. So it was, again, like your yoga, the people
Mm.
the girls that chose to be there.
Mm.
And, and then we would make it fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was probably, but my daughter still talks. My daughters are in their 30s,
Mm-hmm.
their late 30s now, still talk about, oh God, Mom, you did, you wrote about my period in your book, and I asked her permission, but I don't think she knew, and now she thinks it's kind of funny, but it is this kind of, they remember back and they just go, oh yeah, when you were all doing all those, rituals or things like that. But it's really lighthearted, and I think that they're glad that they did it, and then some of it in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a thing of meeting the girls where they were.
Mm-hmm.
I had to really let go of what I thought would be the outcome, and just let it kind of unfold. And so when I did it with older girls, there was a lot more talk about sexuality. I did a group of, like 12, 13-year-olds, and they were very sweet and good friends already.
Mm-hmm.
And so their conversations were a lot different than the 8 and 9-year-olds and their mothers, So each time it had its own flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I just really had to say, okay, paint that altar the way you want it. I have, or not paint it. I'm not going to control the outcome, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a couple of things I'd like to add. And one,
Sure.
I remember, Terri, you sharing with me how much they really loved the quiet journaling part of the circle, of the meeting. And they really took to that, which was really interesting and affirming to note. And the other thing I wanted to mention is in the very first chapter of the book, which is called Moon Wisdom, Living by the Moon, I write about the very first ritual, or one of the first rituals I introduced to a group of 4 girls. It was a friend of mine and her 2 daughters along with mine, and it was a winter solstice ritual. And I even wrote in the book, I wanted to introduce them to something without freaking them out.
Yeah.
A ritual without freaking them out. And so I was able to introduce it in a way that started with the familiar, which was making a wish list. And then we went through that process of looking for like the deeper meanings, the metaphors in these wishes. They really got it. Like one girl's, wish for a car, for example, or to drive was about freedom or independence. And I remember my younger daughter, she was the youngest, her wish was to meet fairies. And one of the other girls said, oh, that's about magic. And so, I think so much is in the way we introduce and, choosing a language that we feel might resonate in some way. Yeah. And then, over time, of course, Terri's daughters and mine, they just became accustomed to, what we were doing and ritual became kind of a household word. And Terri can share a lot about the first moon rituals and the coming of age rituals that, many of the girls just embraced wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, Terri, you spoke to being raised in a Catholic household, and it feels like when you have these markers of ritual that are reinforced by your community or religion, it makes it much easier because you don't have to think about it. You don't have to set it up. You don't have to invite the people. How difficult is it to begin these rituals with these groups? And also, how often do you think it would be, like, would we do it like once a week or once a month? How often would you recommend so that it's more effective?
Well, that's a good question. I did it a lot of different ways, and set up when I did the mother-daughter group, it was once a month
Mm.
on a Sunday. And so it took us 10 months, and with everybody, how busy everybody is, we had to find a time, and then, everybody protected that time.
Mm-hmm.
With girls, you could do it once a week, and just have them commit to doing that. We or join some of the things that they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's up to the person, and then you can have it, although the book is in an order of all the way culminating in a coming of age ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
The great thing about it is that each of the chapters can stand alone. You
Right.
don't need to do the first chapter so it could be whatever's coming up
Mm.
in your life. If there's a girl that, if you have a daughter that is being bullied or having a hard time, going directly to finding your voice and finding that courage to speak your truth, you could start there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so it can be just really adaptable to wherever you are. And that's one of the reasons that just recently we added the journal, and then we added the facilitator's guide. So that, because over the years, periodically, moms have reached out and said, "Oh, I want to start a group.
Mm-hmm.
How do I do that?"
Mm-hmm.
And so you can look at the guide, and it's pretty straightforward. Just, here's some materials you need. Here's some prompts for questions and things like that. And then you can start wherever you are.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. I think the section that keeps jumping out at me is I forget the title of the chapter, but it was about finding your own sacred space, or like making time just for you to be you. Yeah. And the story of Artemis and her time alone in the wilderness to like reconnect. It's something I'm craving, but I also see it, and maybe because I'm craving it, I see it in the children around me, that need of like, I just want time to myself. I just want to be left alone, because they're constantly being told what to do every second of every day. So not just that ritual, but I think many of the rituals in the book remind me to just to be able to create, to reconnect, make that sacred time to come back to oneself. I just wanted to share that. There was no reason I was sharing it other than to say, like, it's one that I keep coming back to, like how important that is, because we forget. And I think it was easier when I was a child. It might have been easier when you were children to find this time, but I just see it, maybe it's just from my perspective, that children are so scheduled now. We are so scheduled now that it's so hard to find that time to even sit, much less, go do ritual, or make that a priority.
Yeah. And that was one of the favorite activities with the girls.
Mm-hmm.
When I would do it with girls, they really liked doing that and finding a space to create their own space, in their house or outside,
Mm-hmm.
and, really making it part of their daily life. And, and they loved just findings, talking about it and then going home and creating a corner or going out in their yard or something like that.
Mhm.
Really thinking about it. But they were really craving it as well.
I think it's also related to the privacy factor. There comes a time in a girl's life, as with all of us, where she starts to feel that need for more privacy, within her family and perhaps even from her parents. And so I think it starts to resonate, that concept of spending time alone, though it's increasingly challenging, as we all know, because girls today have so many devices in their lives. Along with all the activities, there's a device, depending on what age they start using devices, if not a phone, a computer. So there's always, this external stimulation and access to, to other, that pulls us away from ourselves. And so I think it becomes kind of a push-pull. We crave it, and yet we're so pulled by the distraction of it. Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of circle back to, being, as the mother-daughter relationship really changes and things like that. One of the things that has been true for me and for other girls and things, that they will drift away. There will be this, it's just like in toddlerhood, you need to differentiate. You need to move apart to find out who you are, and that's what they're doing. But it's building that solid base. So, at one point, my middle daughter Emma, I was just saying, just tell me one thing you're doing, and she said to me, Mom, you've been through this before. I'll be back.
Very wise.
So, yeah. And so it's that thing, is to trust, that you've laid this foundation, and now maybe they're pushing away. But just like, you sometimes in toddlerhood, you think you're, raising a psychopath when they're having, tantrums every like, what? Yesterday you wanted the crust off, and then they come back around, right? And then they're, and so to trust that foundation that you're laying. So if you do make it through 2 chapters, or you do just a couple of things, is that you have this foundation that you both can return to after you figure out something on your own.
Yeah, psychologically, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say, I'm so glad you said that, Terri, about the foundation, because that was really one of the things we were intending as we, wrote the book, is that we were going to help lay a foundation for the years to come. Yeah. Really important.
It's really important. I feel like it was easier, even with the tantrums in the toddler years. It becomes harder when they can actually debate you with reason.
Yes. And you can always pick up a toddler and say, "We're leaving now," and you can't do that with a preteen or a teenager, right?
Yeah.
So, but to remember that they're doing, it's the same thing. It's the same sort of, like I said, differentiation. It's the same process of, finding out who they are, and then just keeping, in contact when there's an opening.
And that
it made me think, sorry, it made me think of like when I was younger, and I'm going through it with my daughter too. And I'm wondering if there's a psychological reason that girls in particular start to criticize their moms or the adults around them, but primarily their mom. And if that is part of the differentiation of saying, I'm not going to be like you because I'm me and I'm going to do it differently.
I think
Yeah.
that's
And you're a safe
nice.
space.
Yeah.
You're safe. You know, when I work with families, especially, I mean, younger ones, and you know, in child development, I just do some work with kids that are struggling with behavioral challenges, and you know, you're a safe space. The mom is a safe space to be able to experiment with that, and you know, and in some ways, it could be even a compliment. I feel safe enough with you to, because I know you're always going to love me,
Mm.
you know. But in the moment, of course, it hurts, and it's, you know, and it's so, you know, it's so tempting. I always think about, you know, that we're just human. We're just in our humanness, and we're human together, and we make mistakes, and there's so much in a repair is when you come back together and say, oh, I'm sorry, you know, you're modeling all kinds of things, but I'm sorry I lost my temper with you. Or, you know, when Emma told me, you know, I'll be back, I said, no, come back now. I need you now. So, you know, I think that it's just one of those, you know, ups and downs. But Janet, you probably know more about the psychological. What's a girl doing in that time?
Well, I think it's an instinct. You know, the pushing away is an instinct, and it is part of that individuation process. And you know, the things that you know they don't like about us quite likely are projections. You know, we recognize each other in you know those that we're often closest to, and so there has to be. I mean, we're already rejecting parts of ourselves, right? Yeah. And if we see them in someone else, you know, fair game. You know, but yeah, I mean, unconditional love is a safe space. You know, as we're talking, I'm reminded of the Ho'oponopono prayer from Hawaii, which is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And I don't think we can say that prayer often enough to anyone.
Including ourselves.
In the world. The world. Um, yeah, but the mistakes are just inherent to the journey. We're going to make so many mistakes. And yeah, I don't think there's any
I
reason.
think one of the other things that you know, when we would do this, you know, do the groups and things like that, and I know for my daughters, we had a community, and so the groups create this community, and so you know, if you just are doing girls, there's the periphery, it's their mothers. If you're doing mother-daughter groups, so that you know, I know that my daughters have a few mothers, you know, and so that it was this idea of, you know, there's somewhere else that they could go, or that they, you know, because you can't do it, you know, that I think that one of the things that has happened in this book, and the book sort of discreetly talks to, is, you know, the nuclear family is rough. We, you know, we were hunter-gatherers not that long ago. And so to expect that a nuclear family can provide it all and do it all is really unfair to all of us. And so I think just doing some of these in a group of girls and women create a community that then you have respite in as well.
I think that's so profoundly important. It's something I had as a child, as a Cuban American. We had a huge Cuban American community here in Miami. So I always felt like I had several moms, I had several dads, I had several hundreds of cousins, to the point that everybody jokes that I used to call my mom by her first name because that's what everybody called her. So it was a real shock when I had a child and that community wasn't there anymore, because, you know, things got expensive and everybody had to work and everybody had to move away and people were farther apart, and we just didn't have, no longer, even though my grandmother does live down the block, but most of us don't live within that 2-mile radius anymore. So it's kind of the idea of that chosen family is so important.
So important. One thing we haven't mentioned yet is that during this time, Terry and I were neighbors. We lived across the street from each other. And I became a single mother when my daughters were 2 and 5. And so my nuclear family, that box, really broke open. And what I discovered was I had this whole community right there,
Right.
in the neighborhood that became so essential. It's the most essential source of support for me as a mother and also for my daughters. And as Terry, mentioned, they had other mothers, Terry being one of the primary mothers to my daughters as well. And it really gave me, I think, my first look at community. I came by that, through that experience. I can't say it was what I was setting out to create, because I had bought into the box and the nuclear family. And so, yeah, and Terry was also part of a homeschooling community. And yeah, I mean, that was such a great resource, for so many of the things that we were trying out, we were writing about. And then Terry had a ready-made community of mothers and daughters to explore these concepts with. And, we have a whole chapter on community. And the coming of age ceremonies in the last chapter are all about community too.
I resonate with that so much, Janet, because I was a single parent when my daughter was born. And one of the things I recognized immediately was like, I cannot do this alone. It's impossible. And then secondly, I didn't want to be my child's only parent. I wanted her to be able to feel like there were several adults looking out for her, and that there were several adults that maybe had more similar personalities to her, and that she felt more comfortable confiding in certain things with. And it was an effort to go looking for that. Like, I found a daycare center that felt like a community. Everybody knew each other. I actively sought out people in my yoga community where we can make those little communities. And I'm very blessed to have a neighbor also that we have daughters the same age, and that's our little community, and they could go back and forth between houses. For some people, I've heard again and again, they say as an adult, it's so hard to make friends. Or at least close friends. What would, and either of you can answer, what would be your advice to someone that's saying, but it's so hard?
Well, I think a lot of our friendships, if they become real friendships, when we're raising our children, our daughters, are situational. We find other mothers in our neighborhoods, in their schools, in the places where we coexist. And, I think it's sort of a matter of finding those like spirits. And, for Terry and I, when we were writing this book and, when it was published and beyond, it was sort of like a coming out. Like a lot of these concepts and this language was not mainstream. And, to kind of come out, as a woman who was, seeking and practicing, these kinds of spiritual, experiences and so on. It's there's probably a little reticence. Say, hey, you want to come over for a ritual?
Yeah. And so, yeah, but to kind of, circle back to the, I think that it's the same advice that, you would give your daughter is to be intentional. Like, what is it that you want in a friend? And then be brave enough to ask someone, because I think that often we're waiting for the other. So, if there is a person that you see, or if there is something that you want to join, ask. And, and just say, hey, I think you're kind of cool. Do you want to go get coffee?
Yeah.
Or I really appreciated it when you did this. And I think that most often people will do, but we're afraid of asking.
Mm.
And, and I think that just looking around and going, what is it that I want? And then looking for that. Another place that I found community was at the Unitarian. There's a Unitarian church in town. So even looking at groups that are already meeting that look interesting, or starting a book club, and those types of things. I think you go back to read the chapter on finding your voice, and then practice
On yourself.
practice on yourself, right?
I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that, we were born into a culture where we learned to compete and compare, and so I think for a long time, women haven't had the kind of trust in each other that we're discovering, with our own evolution, and the remembering the deep divine feminine values, which are about cooperation and support and community. And so, I think that still exists, that not quite sure what I want to call it, but that persona or that facade, where we meet in that way. And there's this, imaging and competing comparison. And I think it requires also a vulnerability, and as Terry's, mentioning, the asking, to be willing to be more open and ask, and then to connect, on in a more authentic way, and share. I think we have these false beliefs that everybody else has it more together. And, we're sort of conditioned to make it look that way. And we all know the truth, that we all have the same, insecurities and self-doubts and fears. And so I think there's, a lot of that, that can still be operating. Social media probably doesn't help a lot.
Not at all. No.
Yeah.
Not at all. It just makes me think of how speaking of social media, there was a meme about how all millennials clean their house for 5 hours before a guest comes over. And then when the guest comes over, we all go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. The house is a mess, and it's impeccable. It's cleaner than it's been all week.
Yeah. It's so easy to be passive because we have so much, is just to let it come to us, or be passive about some of the things that we need, that we want. And to, like I said, it's okay to ask for it. It's okay to make an intention, as I want to meet a friend who shares a lot of the same values, and to, make that an intention. And I think that, it will happen.
I remember when, Terry, you're reminding me, when my oldest daughter was in junior high, she had, just gone into 7th grade, and at a huge junior high school, kids coming from all different schools. She was very inherently shy, and it didn't come easy to her, connecting and communicating. And I remember, a number of things. I mean, we wrote about it in one of the chapters, the chapter on communication, because there was a lot of coaching, that went into supporting her, in doing that, which Terry's describing. I remember also, telling my daughters, both who are, more introverted than extroverted, you only need one friend, if you find that one friend, that is a gift.
Hmm.
You don't necessarily need the whole crowd. And so I think, that's might be an easier way to approach making friends and friendship.
Mhm.
Like find that one person that you feel, you know, uh, a sense of, let's just say possibility,
Mhm.
based on qualities. And um, yeah.
Yeah, it makes it feel like less of a mountain to climb, especially with how busy everyone is. It's like, oh, I don't have to like go find 20 people, or I don't have to join a group, or I don't have to manage a book club. I could just ask,
Mhm.
Sally from the PTA for coffee. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, before we go, I would love to know, and this is a big question, it's a loaded question. What is the one thing that you would like readers to take from this book?
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Are you ready, Terry, or shall I go?
You can go. I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know for me, I mean, there's probably a lot. I probably have a lot of answers. So I'm gonna
Mhm.
try to distill it into one thing that I felt so called to, discover in myself, was my, finding one's true self
Hmm.
and really honoring one's true nature and being true to that self, being true to oneself, um, in the face of, all kinds of challenges to be someone that we're not. I mean, I think this is
Mhm.
ongoing. And, kind of going hand in hand with that is the essential value of intuition,
Hmm.
as a compass. And that's, what we continually sought to instill in our daughters. There's a whole chapter on intuition, that they could trust that inner voice. They could
Mhm.
trust the sensations in their bodies that were telling them, no.
Mhm.
And they could use their voices. So I think for me, those things all go hand in hand,
Mhm. And for
really.
women as well, you might be
Mm,
speaking to girls, but I think doing these rituals is a great reminder for us as women
right.
to remember those things for ourselves, because
Yeah.
I, for one, often forget.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's easy
yeah.
to forget. And
And
I think it's, we're in a continual process of forgetting and remembering
Hmm.
and forgetting and remembering.
Hmm.
I think that's just perhaps lifelong.
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the rituals and things that one of the things that helps with regulation is predictability.
Hmm.
Rhythm,
Mhm.
things that are rhythmic, predictable, and so having a ritual or having something that is predictable then can bring you back to your center, and so making returning to yourself, and then one of the things that I always like to think is notice. So we start noticing things, but you notice without judgment and hold yourself and everybody around you with grace. That there are these, ups and downs, and that it will be okay. It will be okay.
It's beautiful, Terry. I
Yeah.
want to make a comment, if I may, about,
Mhm.
the rhythmic predictability, which is really where the moon comes in,
Hmm.
because the book is also about living by the moon. And, I know for myself and many others, once we discover that rhythm, there is a predictable rhythm. Like
Mhm.
there's a lunar cycle. We
Right.
have a new lunar cycle every month, and there's 8 phases of the moon, and each of those phases has a unique opportunity. And so when we can tune in to the cycles of the moon and that universal source of energy, we can start to at least trust
Mhm.
that will be constant and continuous.
Mhm. I love that you said that, because I have a hard time showing myself grace with going through phases, right? It's almost like I forget that we all go through phases, and I'm not going to wake up and be this jolly, happy person every day, or I'm not going to have a ton of energy to do all the things I want to do. All of that depends on so many factors, including the moon. And I think that's a great way to like give yourself, just be able to remember that like we're not these static robot beings like social media and our culture would like us to believe we are.
Right.
We're constantly changing.
Right. And how essential it is to rest.
Yeah. Sometimes we need to be the full moon, and sometimes we just need to be the new moon. Disappear for a while.
Yes.
It's a brilliant way to end this podcast. I just want to thank you both for sharing all your wisdom with me and everyone that's listening, and also for the privilege of just witnessing your friendship, because I think it's truly something to aspire to. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is a great gift. Can I make a pitch for the books?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, the original book, I'll hold it up, see if it's visible. This is the original book.
That's the one I have.
Yeah, Moon Mother, Moon Daughter. And, we were so blessed, to have had our proposal accepted by this publishing company in 2002, Fairwinds Press. And they actually titled the book Moon Mother, Moon Daughter, Myths and Rituals That Celebrate a Girl's Coming of Age. That wasn't our working title.
Oh, yeah.
And they also found the artist who created the beautiful cover art.
It's really pretty.
Yeah. And so, as Terri mentioned, because of our readers, reaching out over those, almost 20 years, they were, a lot of women were using the book to create circles, but they asked, for a very specific facilitator's guide. And so we created this Moon Circles Facilitators Guide and published it on the 20th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's my next purchase.
Of the original book. And we also came up with a journal.
Oh, that's really pretty.
Yeah, same artist, By the Light of the Moon. And, interestingly, By the Light of the Moon was our original working title.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a blank journal, and throughout it there are quotes about the moon.
That's beautiful.
So it's now a trio that we offer, and are just so grateful for the continued receptivity. 20 plus years later, the book still sells worldwide.
That's incredible. Well, it's a testament to the rituals and the work. So I'll be putting those links in the show notes so that everyone can access it if they so choose.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you again, Kristen. It was really nice to really meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you both.
Yes, thank you so much. So much. Bye.
Bye.